Hello, dear gentlemen, welcome to our channel. Today, we will not be reviewing the Land Rover Defender 9110. I will tell you about the history of Land Rover Defender 9110. Subscribe to the channel to help me. The Land Rover Defender is a line of British off-road automobiles and pickup trucks. It was first debuted as the Land Rover 110 and was joined by the Land Rover 90 in 1984. The new, extra-long Land Rover 127 followed in 1985. They were created in the 1980s from the original Land Rover series, which was introduced at the Amsterdam Motor Show in April 1948, and always had four-wheel drive. In 1990, Land Rover renamed the 90 and 110 as the Defender 90 and Defender 110, respectively, because the moniker Land Rover no longer functioned as the name of a single vehicle after the 1989 launch of the Land Rover Discovery. The Defender 130 evolved from the 127. The Land Rover Defender, originally known as the Land Rover 110/110 and joined in 1984 by the Land Rover 90/9, the car, a British version of the Willys Jeep used during the Second World War, became known all over the world for its toughness and adaptability. The Land Rover's detuned versions of Rover engines were initially employed, together with a steel ladder chassis and an aluminum alloy body. Even though the Land Rover Defender has arrived, the original Defender is still made in underdeveloped nations. L663. The Land Rover Defender, originally known as the Land Rover 110/110 and joined in 1984 by the Land Rover 90/9. Although the Defender was not a new generation design, it did incorporate significant changes from the series Land Rovers, including the adoption of coil springs front and rear as opposed to all leaf springs on the previous, with the exception of high-capacity, payload models, which kept the rear leaf springs. Better axle articulation and ride quality were both benefits of coil springs. The Defender was equipped with permanent, on-road, four-wheel drive by adding a locking center differential to the transfer case. The modifications were inspired by the Range Rover, and the interiors were also updated. The most noticeable exterior changes to the Land Rover Defender, originally introduced as the Land Rover 110 and joined in 1984 by the Land Rover 90, included a full-length bonnet, full-width integrated grille and headlights, combined with, finally, a single-piece windscreen, plus widened wheel arches that covered new, wider track axles. At first, the engineering department retained a part-time 4WD system, similar to earlier models, but it was quickly removed in 1984 due to declining sales. A new series of contemporary and more potent engines was gradually introduced, however the engine from the Series 3 was kept. Initialized as the Land Rover 110, the Land Rover Defender was joined by the Land Rover 90 externally, a new model, in 1984. The 33-year production run of the 90 110 and Defender models was listed as the 16th longest single-generation car in history in 2020, even after taking into account the series Land Rovers and possibly continued licensed products. Jaguar Land Rover unveiled the first generation of Land Rover Defenders in 2020, moving away from body-on-chassis construction in favor of integrated bodywork and all-around independent suspension. Prior to the announcement of a third wheelbase length, the Defender 130, in 2022, the range was only available in two wheelbase lengths. Only closed, estate car bodies are offered in the new Defender series. History. Initialized as the Land Rover 110, the Land Rover Defender was joined by the Land Rover 90 externally, a new model, in 1984. Production of the Land Rover series and Defender models came to an end on January 29, 2016, following a continuous run of 67 years and the construction of slightly over 2 million units. A dedicated team helped put together the 2 millionth unit, which was eventually auctioned off for charity to benefit the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, IFRC, organizations. A nod to the first-ever pre-production Land Rover, registration HU 166, was made on the final Land Rover Defender as it moved off the assembly line. This Defender was the 2,016,933rd one ever made. In January 2018, information on a limited edition Defender Works V8 with 400 horsepower, 298 kilowatts, was released. The Defender was last sold in the US in 1997, and its sale in North America was thereafter outlawed until 2020 due to safety regulations. In September 2019, the brand new 2020 Land Rover Defender made its debut on a global scale and was initially available in two wheelbase configurations. This new car has an aluminum monocoque body and does not share any parts or technology with its predecessor. Name and badge distinctions. In January 2018, a 400 horsepower, 298 kilowatts, limited edition Defender Works V8 was unveiled. The Defender didn't last till 2020. The coil-sprung Land Rover was first presented as the Land Rover 110 in 1983, and the Land Rover 90 was added in 1984. The numbers in the model names correspond to the corresponding wheelbases in inches. In actuality, the 90 was closer to 93 inches at 92.9 inches. Advertising, handbooks, and manuals all used the whole number, and the vehicles also had badges atop the radiator grille that read Land Rover 90 or Land Rover 110, with the number written numerically. The previous Land Rover series was superseded by the 90 and 110, and at the time of launch, the Range Rover was the only other Land Rover model being produced. The Land Rover Discovery, a third model that would be produced concurrently with the previous two by Land Rover, was introduced in 1989. The 90 and the 110 from the 1991 model year were renamed Defender 90 and Defender 110 to prevent any confusion. The 90 and 110 replaced the older Land Rover series, and at the time of launch, there was only one other Land Rover model available. These vehicles had Defender badges on the front, and either Defender 90 or Defender 110 badges on the back. The most recent model, which was produced from 2007 to 2016, retained the vacant space above the radiator for the insignia. Instead, in keeping with the Discovery and Freelander, Land Rover was written across the leading edge of the bonnet in raised individual letters. A new Defender badge with an underlined swoosh was on the back. These most recent versions lack emblems that indicate the vehicle's wheelbase model. When it launched, the only other Land Rover model available was the 90 and 110, which superseded the previous Land Rover series. The 1985 release Land Rover 127, with a wheelbase of 127 inches, 3,226 mm, was always marketed with the name written numerically. Although the wheelbase was unaltered, it changed to Defender 130 after assuming the Defender moniker. The North American specification, NAS, Defender 110, which was sold for the 1993 model year, had a badge that read Defender above the radiator grille, whereas the NAS Defender 90, which was sold for the 1994 to 1997 model years, had Land Rover decals that were placed individually across the radiator grille. At the time of its release, the 90 and 110 superseded the previous Land Rover series, and the only other Land Rover model, and along with Defender 110 or Defender 90 beneath the Land Rover lozenge and the specific limited edition production run number, these NAS Defenders also had a cast plaque on the rear tub in the original design of the series' estate cars. Land Rover 90 and 110. In 1983, the Land Rover 110, a moniker that represented the 110-inch wheelbase of the type that is now known as the Defender, began production. The Land Rover 110, a model whose name reflected the 110-inch, 2,800 mm, length of the wheelbase, first went into production in 1983. The Defender is now a model that has since gained that moniker. Soon after, the 93-inch, 2,362 mm, and 127-inch, 3,226 mm, wheelbase Land Rover 90 and Land Rover 127 models were released. The post-1983 cars don't look all that different from the Series 3 Land Rover. The most obvious alterations include a full-length bonnet, a new grille, and the installation of wheel arch extensions to suit wider track axles. In 1983, the Land Rover 110, a moniker that represented the 110-inch wheelbase of the type that is now known as the Defender, began production. At first, the Conservative Engineering Division asked that a part-time 4WD system common to models built since 1949 be made available for the Land Rover. The part-time scheme, however, did not prove popular and was immediately removed from the options list by 1984. The engine and other body panels were carried over from the Series 3, but the 90 and 110's mechanical components were updated, including the Land Rover 110, which reflected the 110-inch coil springs and improved axle articulation, a permanent four-wheel drive system derived from the Range Rover, with a 2-speed transfer gearbox and a lockable center differential, and a modernized interior all went into production in 1983. Today's model is known as the Defender. A new series of contemporary engines that get gradually stronger and larger, a taller one-piece windscreen. Both the 110 and the 90 were introduced in 1983 and 1984, respectively. The series models and very early 110s featured sliding panels. Wind-up windows were installed starting in 1984. A 2.5-liter, 153 cubic inches, 68 horsepower, 51 kilowatts, diesel engine was also introduced at this time. This engine had a similar design to the preceding 2.3-liter, 140 cubic inches, engine, but it had larger capacity and a more advanced fuel injection system. The performance of the 3.5-liter, 214 cubic inches, V8 Range Rover engine was enhanced by a low compression variant. It was initially offered in the Range Rover LT95 110 with a 4-speed transmission with integral transfer case and vacuum-operated differential lock, then later with a high-strength Santana 5-speed transmission. During this time, Land Rover began to promote the utilitarian Land Rover as a personal recreational vehicle. The County 4x4s were promoted as multi-purpose family vehicles with upgraded interior trim and more comfortable seats, although the basic pickup, 4x4, and van versions were still functional vehicles. This shift was mirrored in Land Rover beginning what had long been standard practice in the auto industry, year-to-year updates and enhancements to the County model in order to draw in new customers and persuade current owners to trade in for a new car. The addition of new options like radio cassette players, raw-style wheels, headlamp wash and wipe systems, as well as accessories like surfboard carriers and bike racks, were among these modifications. They also changed the external styling graphics and color possibilities. The new model's popularity was largely attributed to the transition from leaf spring to coil spring suspension. It offers enhanced weight carrying capability, handling, and ride comfort for off-road use.